If you heard growling in the freezing woods, would you walk toward it? Most people would turn back, especially in the brutal silence of a Montana winter. But John wasn't most people. At 68, he wasn't afraid of pain, he lived with it every day. After losing Elaine, his wife of 42 years, the house felt more like a tomb than a home. Every creaking floorboard echoed with her absence, so he walked. Into the forest, into the cold, into anything that might drown the grief just for a while. He wasn't looking to be a hero. He just didn't want to feel so hollow anymore. That morning, his boots crunched into the snow like always. The trees around his cabin formed a skeletal frame of pine and frost, their black limbs cutting into the pale sky. His thermos steamed in his gloved hand, and he followed the same path he'd walked 100 times. The birds were quiet. The world felt still. Then it came a sound, not far off the trail. It was deep, raw, and pained. Not human, but not fully animal either. He stopped, tilted his head. Something was wrong. Something was suffering. And without thinking, he turned toward it. The sound grew louder as he moved toward its slow, deliberate steps between branches and over frozen roots. It wasn't a hunter's call or the bark of a deer. It was a growl, yes, but broken, almost desperate. John's eyes scanned the forest floor until he saw the shape near a thicket. At first, it looked like a mound of earth or a fallen log. But then it shifted. Breathed. It was a bear. A young one, maybe 2, 3 years old. And it was caught, barbed wire twisted around its front leg and chest like a metal serpent. Blood marked the snow. The bear's fur was matted with ice and crimson. Its breathing was shallow, fast. One of its front paws was lifted off the ground, twisted at an unnatural angle. The wire dug in so deeply, it had nearly vanished beneath the flesh. The bear turned its head toward John. Its eyes weren't feral. They weren't wild. They were terrified. John didn't move. Every instinct said to back away, to retreat. But there was something in that stare, something human. Not rage, not violence, just pain, raw and familiar. And John knew that feeling far too well. His hands clenched the thermos tighter as the bear let out another low groan. John had been a ranger in his younger years. He'd seen wounds like this before, but never so close. The wire looked like it had been there for at least a day, maybe more. How it got wrapped up in an old ranch fence this deep into the woods, he couldn't guess. But the real question was this: could he do anything? He wasn't a vet. He wasn't young. But as he stood there, heart pounding, something inside him stirred. Not fear, not pity, purpose. He whispered low, as if talking to the air. Easy, big guy. I'm not here to hurt you. The bear didn't move, didn't growl, only watched. Slowly, John knelt down. His knees creaked. Snow soaked into his pants. He couldn't get close without tools, and he knew the risk. If the bear panicked, he could be mauled. But it didn't feel like that. This wasn't a predator. This was something wounded, just like him. And so he backed away carefully, calmly, and made his way back to the cabin, every step echoing with urgency. Inside his shed, dust danced in the cold sunlight as he rummaged through a red toolbox he hadn't opened in years. Wire cutters, gloves, a flashlight, and a first aid kit for animals. His hands trembled not from age, but from adrenaline. He'd done search and rescue in his 30s, but this felt different. This wasn't duty, this was choice. As he loaded everything into a backpack, a memory flashed. Elaine, nursing an injured crow once, hands so gentle, eyes so full of care. Every life matters, she used to say, especially the ones no one notices. Back in the forest, the bear was still there. It hadn't moved much. John approached slowly, each step careful and quiet. He set down his gear, crouching again in the snow. All right, he murmured, let's see what we've got here. The bear flinched as he reached forward, but didn't growl. Its breathing was more labored now. He needed to work fast. The wire was old, rusted, and buried deep in the bear's leg. He slid on the gloves, took the cutters in both hands, and began the delicate, terrifying task of freeing it. Each snip felt like a gamble. The bear shifted but didn't strike. John talked the whole time, voice low and steady. You're all right. Just hold still. We're almost there. It took 20 minutes, maybe more, but finally the last twist of barbed wire came free. The bear collapsed into the snow, chest rising and falling in ragged rhythm. Blood seeped from the wounds, but there was no more metal. John backed up slowly, breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what would happen next. The bear looked up at him, not with fear, not with hate. There was something else, something calm. It struggled to its feet, shaky and unsure, and took a few steps toward the trees. Then it stopped, turned its head, eyes locked on John one last time. And in that frozen second, he felt something shift deep inside his chest, as if the ice was finally cracking. As if life was reminding him he could still do something that mattered. He nodded, unable to speak. But before he could exhale, a sound split the silence. A low, thunderous growl not from the bear. From behind, John turned, heart jumping, and there they were. Two lions, massive, golden, real, not mountain lions, African lions, unmistakable. They stepped from the shadows like ghosts from another world. His brain couldn't process it. This wasn't a zoo. This was Montana. How could they be here? The bear tensed. John held his breath. One lion took a slow step forward, then another. It wasn't looking at John. It was focused on the bear. The injured one. The air felt electric. John grabbed the only thing near his wire cutters. It was absurd, but instinct. He wasn't going to let it happen. Not now. Not after everything. Not after that connection. He stood between lion and bear, heart pounding, arms wide. No, he said aloud. You don't get to ruin this. The forest held its breath. The lions paused, just for a second. And that second changed everything. The silence between predator and protector didn't last long. One of the lions let out a guttural huff, its golden mane shivering in the icy breeze. The other circled slightly, eyes darting between the injured bear and the old man standing in front of it. John's breath came in short, steaming puffs. He knew he couldn't outrun them. His body wasn't built for that anymore. But something primal, something ancient inside him said, "Don't move." His feet planted into the snow like roots. He raised one gloved hand slowly, not as a threat but as a shield. The bear let out a weak moan behind him. John could hear the creature's labored breathing, the occasional shuffle of its paw in the snow. He didn't dare turn to check on it. The lions were too close. The nearest was no more than 30 feet away now, its massive body half hidden by the brush, eyes fixed on the bear like a target. But still it didn't charge. It didn't roar. It just watched. The tension in the air was unbearable, like a drawn bowstring waiting to snap. John's fingers gripped the wire cutters tighter. This didn't make sense. Not just the lions being here, that was impossible enough, but their behavior. They weren't hunting. Not yet. They were studying, reading the moment. One of them tilted its head, almost like it was curious. John had worked with wildlife before. He'd seen curiosity in wolves, hesitation in cougars, but this was different. These animals weren't native. They weren't acting like wild predators. They felt out of place, disoriented, like they had been taken from one world and dropped into another. And somehow, that made them even more dangerous. John took a slow step back, still facing the lions. Snow crunched under his boot. The bear didn't move. The lion on the left gave a low, rumbling grunt, and the other answered it with a short, bark-like growl. Were they communicating, planning? He swallowed hard. I don't know what happened to you, he muttered, voice cracking. But you're not touching him. He knew how absurd that sounded, but saying it out loud made it real. Made it a promise. His heart pounded in his ears. His body screamed to flee, but his soul stayed still. Then movement. From behind him, the bear was trying to stand. It rose unsteadily, shaking from pain and blood loss, its injured leg dragging slightly. John didn't turn, but he sensed it. The lions did too. Their heads lifted higher, ears twitching. The wounded creature was trying to leave. That's when the second lion stepped forward, more quickly this time. It was testing the moment, breaking the invisible boundary between observation and action. John shouted without thinking, "Hey!" His voice cracked the stillness like a gunshot. The lion flinched, just a little, just enough. The first one paused again. The bear let out a sound something between a cough and a growl and slumped back down to its knees. Blood darkened the snow beneath it. John's breath hitched. This wasn't sustainable. He couldn't hold this standoff forever, and the bear wouldn't last much longer without help. He had to think, fast. Nearby, he spotted a branch thick, broken at one end. Slowly, He crouched and picked it up, never taking his eyes off the lions. His pulse thundered in his chest. He lifted the branch above his head and waved it, making himself look bigger. "Go on," he shouted. "Get out of here." The lions didn't move. One of them blinked, almost lazily. The other let out a sharp snort and took a step closer. John shouted again, louder this time, the branch slicing through the cold air. "Go." Finally, something shifted. The second lion paused, its body tense. And then, with a flick of its tail, it turned just slightly. Not fleeing, not retreating, but giving space. A test passed, a decision not to escalate. John didn't wait. He stepped sideways toward the bear, keeping one eye on the lions. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "You gotta help me here." The bear groaned, tried again to rise. It took one limping step, then another, collapsing beside him. Too weak, too much blood lost. John made his choice. He dropped the stick, pulled off his pack, and began tearing strips of fabric from an old flannel shirt. He pressed them against the worst wounds, fingers numb from the cold and adrenaline. He had to slow the bleeding, had to do something. And still the lions watched, silent sentinels in a forest they didn't belong to. John worked quickly, wrapping the makeshift bandages around the bear's leg and chest. It whimpered, but didn't resist. The animal was spent. He could feel its heartbeat rapid, fading. "I've got you," John whispered. "You're gonna make it." He didn't know if that was true. But it had to be, for both of them. Somewhere deep inside, a fire began to burn again. Not of fear, of defiance, of life. The next part was harder. John stood, looped his arms under the bear's front legs, and tried to lift. It was heavier than he thought, even injured. His back screamed in protest. But inch by inch, he dragged the bear toward a narrow sled path he'd used in winter to haul firewood. His cabin wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes, but now it felt like a mile. Every movement hurt. The bear moaned softly, eyes fluttering. "Stay with me," John grunted. "We're almost there." Behind him, the lions began to walk again, but not forward. Away. They slipped into the trees like shadows, silent and golden, vanishing without a sound. John didn't understand it. He didn't need to. He just knew the danger was gone for now. He pulled the bear with everything he had left. Sweat froze on his skin, his legs trembled, but he didn't stop. Not until the cabin came into view, smoke still curling from the chimney, safety, shelter, and maybe hope. He staggered through the door, dragging the bear across the threshold, breathless and shaking. This was the line. This was the moment that changed everything. He laid the bear gently on an old rug by the fireplace. The animal wheezed softly, eyes blinking with confusion. John lit the fire higher, wrapped blankets around its body, and started boiling water. He moved without thinking now, reflex, instinct. Elaine had done this kind of thing all the time, for cats, birds, even a fox once. He could hear her voice in his mind. "Don't panic. Focus. One heartbeat at a time." He did. He focused, cleaned the wounds, applied ointment, spoke softly. The bear didn't fight, didn't growl, just breathed. The night passed in flickering firelight and whispered prayers. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the earth in silence. John stayed awake, watching over the creature. At times, he thought the bear might not make it. But each time he leaned in, he could still hear that fragile rhythm, slow, steady, alive. He leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy, body aching. But he didn't leave its side, not for a second. In saving the bear, something inside him had reawakened. Something he thought was gone forever. Morning came quietly. The bear stirred, shifting slightly under the blankets. Its eyes opened just for a moment and met John's. There was no fear in them now. No panic, only pain and trust. John exhaled shakily, terror stinging his eyes. He reached out, resting a hand gently on the bear's massive shoulder. "We made it," he said softly. "You're safe now." He wasn't sure who he was saying it to. The bear, himself, maybe both, but it was true. In that warm room, far from death and frost and golden predators, they were safe, but questions remained. How did the lions get here? Where did they go? Was someone behind this? John didn't know, but he knew something bigger was happening. Something unnatural, and maybe something sacred. Because as impossible as it all seemed, He had felt at that moment of connection in the clearing, when time slowed and a choice was made. He had stepped into the unknown and come back changed, not just because he saved the bear, but because the bear had saved something in him, too. And he couldn't walk away anymore. By midday, the bear had managed to lift its head, groggy but alert. Its breathing was still labored, but steadier. The makeshift bandages were soaked in blood, but the bleeding had slowed. John had done what he could, clean the wounds, applied what little antiseptic he had, wrapped the legs again with towels from Elaine's old linen drawer. The bear hadn't tried to move much, though it whimpered quietly when John got too close. He gave it space, but stayed nearby. He knew trauma, both the kind that tore flesh and the kind that lodged itself deep where no hands could reach. John sat by the fireplace, drinking weak coffee and watching the snowfall outside the window in a slow, endless drift. The world felt quieter than usual, almost reverent. He glanced at the bear and thought, not for the first time, how absurd this all was. An old man alone in the Montana wilderness, nursing a wild bear in his living room. But it didn't feel absurd, it felt right. Like this was supposed to happen. The silence in his life had been waiting for something exactly this improbable to break it open. Around mid-afternoon, a truck rolled up his long, snowy driveway, tires crunching the ice with authority. John stood quickly, instinct on high alert. Visitors were rare out here, especially unexpected ones. He stepped outside, coat thrown over his shoulders, wire cutters still tucked in his back pocket out of habit. The truck door opened, and out stepped a woman in uniform tan jacket, state wildlife patch on her sleeve, clipboard in hand. She looked like she meant business. Her name tag read Officer R. Delgado. Her eyes scanned him, then the cabin. "We got a report of 2 escaped lions in the area," she said without preamble. John's heart thudded, so he hadn't imagined it. "I saw them," he replied, voice rough. "They were real. Came out of nowhere." Officer Delgado frowned, scribbled something. "Where exactly?" He pointed toward the woods behind his cabin. "About a quarter-mile west, near an old fence line. They were watching a bear when that got caught in barbed wire. I cut it loose." Delgado looked up sharply. "You approached a bear, alone?" John held her gaze. "I didn't approach it, I helped it." She didn't smile. Just nodded once and wrote more. "What happened to the lions?" she asked, her tone clipped. "They left," he said. "Didn't attack, just watched. Then disappeared into the trees." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Can I see the bear?" John hesitated. Every instinct wanted to protect it now, like it was family. But he stepped aside. Inside. "It's hurt bad." Delgado followed him in and stopped cold at the sight of the bear curled by the fire, eyes barely open, breathing shallow but calm. Her posture softened slightly. "My God," she murmured. "It's still alive," John nodded. "Just barely." Delgado knelt beside the animal, inspecting the injuries with professional precision. "You stabilized it," he nodded again. "Best I could." She shook her head in disbelief. Most people would have called animal control. Most wouldn't have gotten involved at all. John sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "I couldn't walk away, not this time." Delgado looked at him closely, as if weighing something deeper. "You may have saved its life," she said. "But it's still in bad shape. We need a vet." "I'll make the call." Within an hour, a second vehicle arrived, this one marked with a wildlife rescue logo. A young vet named Dr. Eli Kramer entered the cabin with 2 assistants and a rolling case of supplies. He moved fast, with quiet authority, kneeling beside the bear, checking pulse, examining the wounds, murmuring updates to his team. John watched from the corner, tense, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. Delgado stayed beside him, arms crossed. "You did good," she said quietly. "Most wouldn't have tried." John shook his head. "It wasn't bravery. It was something else. I needed to do it." The vet administered fluids, painkillers, and antibiotics. The bear barely reacted, too weak to protest. "We need to get it to our facility," Dr. Kramer said, voice calm. "If we leave it here, it won't make it." John stepped forward. "Then I'm coming with it." Kramer hesitated. "That's not standard procedure, sir." John didn't blink. "Neither is rescuing a bear from barbed wire while to lions circle you." Delgado raised an eyebrow, and after a pause, she nodded to Kramer. "Let him ride along. He's earned it, And just like that, the bear was gently lifted onto a stretcher and loaded into the van. The drive to the wildlife facility took just under 2 hours. John rode in the back, seated beside the unconscious bear, watching its chest rise and fall with every shallow breath. The vet checked vitals periodically, murmuring soft reassurances. John didn't speak much, just kept his hand resting lightly near the bear's head, not touching, but close. There was something unspoken between them now, a kind of tether. He remembered what it was like sitting in the hospital with Elaine, watching machines do what her body no longer could. That same helplessness, that same desperate hope. When they arrived, the bear was wheeled into a clean, warm recovery room. Monitors were attached, 4 lines were placed. John stayed back, letting the professionals work, but his eyes never left the animal. Hours passed. The vet came to him with updates: stable for now, still critical, internal bleeding under control, infection being treated. You got to it just in time, Dr. Kramer said. Another 6 hours and it wouldn't have made it. John exhaled, the weight of that sentence settling deep into his chest. He had acted on instinct, but it had made all the difference. Delgado returned that evening with more news. The lions were part of a private collection, she said, unfolding a map. Illegal transport. The truck crashed on a back road 2 nights ago. Owner fled. Authorities found cages and tranquilizers in the wreckage. Looks like they escaped into the wild. John stared at her. Why didn't they attack? Delgado shrugged. They weren't hungry yet, and maybe they saw something in you they didn't fear. Or maybe, she added, you were just lucky. John nodded slowly, unsure what to believe, but deep down, it felt like something else. Like he'd been part of a moment not meant for destruction but for decision. John stayed by the bear's side for the next few days. He slept on a cot in the corner, helped where he could, learned the names of the rescue staff. They treated him with respect, even curiosity. Not many people would do what he did. Not at his age, but he didn't feel heroic. He felt responsible and connected. The bear began to eat again, small portions, carefully monitored. It started to lift its head more, react to voices. Its eyes followed John when he moved, and when he spoke, it calmed. There was recognition there, trust, a fragile thread growing stronger each day. The bond between them grew silently. One evening, as John sat beside the bear humming a song Elaine used to sing, the animal reached out its paw, resting it gently against his boot. It wasn't fear or desperation, it was something else. Affection, memory. A moment passed between them, deeper than words. One of the volunteers nearby whispered, I've never seen anything like that. John didn't answer. He just smiled faintly, eyes misted, and kept humming. The past few days had given him more than healing. They'd given him meaning again, a reason to rise each morning. The media caught wind of the story. Retired ranger rescues bear from barbed wire and lions. Photos of John and the animal spread online. Reporters called. Interviews were requested, but John stayed out of it, declining all press. This wasn't a headline to him, it was personal, sacred. Still, the attention brought funding to the Wildlife Center, and with it, new equipment and staff. The bear's survival became a symbol, a story people clung to in dark times. A reminder that compassion still existed, even in frozen woods far from the world's noise. And then came the day John had been dreading, the day they told him the bear would need to be released. It was healing well stronger each morning, eager to walk, to stretch, to leave the small enclosure behind. It was what was best, what was right, but John's chest tightened at the thought. He nodded quietly. Can I be there? He asked. Delgado and Dr. Kramer exchanged a glance, then nodded. Of course, Kramer said. You should be, and so, preparations were made for the release. A return to the wild, a return to solitude for both of them. John helped load the bear into a transport cage, this time without fear. The animal watched him with steady eyes, calm and alert. The ride back into the woods was quiet. Snow still covered the earth in white silence. They returned to the same clearing where the barbed wire had once bound, where the lions had once stalked. The cage door opened. The bear stepped out slowly, testing the ground. Then, without hesitation, it walked to the edge of the trees, paused, turned back. Their eyes met one last time. No sound, no growl, just presence. And then it was gone. The woods felt different after that day. John kept walking the same trails, boots cracking frozen leaves, breath rising into the winter air, but something had shifted inside him. Where silence once felt like punishment, it now felt like peace. Each tree he passed seemed to stand taller. Each gust of wind carried meaning instead of emptiness. He no longer walked to forget. He walked to remember. To hold onto the space where two broken beings had met and helped each other stand again. Life hadn't magically healed, but it had changed. And that change echoed in every step he took. Back at the cabin, his days found a new rhythm. He repaired the back fence, restocked his pantry, and organized the old shed. Elaine's flannel shirt still hung by the door, and he found himself talking to her again, aloud, without shame. "You wouldn't believe what happened," he'd say, pouring coffee. "You were right about animals, they know." The emptiness in the house softened. Not vanished, he still missed her every day, but it didn't ache the same way. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was shared now, with memories, with gratitude, with something sacred he couldn't quite name. He started volunteering at the wildlife center once a week, driving into town even when the roads were rough. He didn't do much, mostly fed animals, cleaned enclosures, helped the younger staff carry supplies, but they respected him. Called him Bear John, half as a joke, half in reverence. He didn't mind. The name felt earned. More importantly, he felt useful again. He had something to offer. Not just stories, but steadiness, presence, the kind of calm only a man who'd faced the edge could carry and still smile. One afternoon, a school group visited the center. Dozens of kids, bundled in coats, wide-eyed as they toured the pens and listened to the staff explain the different species. When they reached the enclosure where new bear cub was recovering, one child asked if it was the same bear from the story. John, standing nearby with a pail of water, smiled. "No," he said gently. "That one's back where he belongs." The teacher asked if he'd be willing to speak to the group. John hesitated, then nodded. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and began to tell the story not just of the bear, but of the choice to stay, to help, to not walk away. The kids listened, wide-eyed, silent, and when he finished, one little girl raised her hand and asked, "Were you scared?" John smiled softly. "Terrified," he said. "But fear doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you're about to do something important." The teachers clapped. Some of the staff wiped away tears. And in that moment, John realized something had shifted outside of him too. The story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to the people it touched. To anyone who needed to remember that kindness still mattered. That healing could come from the most unexpected places. A month later, Delgado returned with a request. The state was launching a new initiative, educational programs about human-wildlife connection, conservation, and empathy. They wanted to use John's story as the centerpiece. A short documentary, community visits, maybe even a children's book. John raised his eyebrows. "Me, and a buck," Delgado smiled. "You and the bear. It's not just about survival. It's about what we choose to protect." He thought about it for a long time. Then nodded. "Okay," he said. "As long as the bear's the hero." Delgado grinned. "You both are." They filmed parts of it right there at the cabin. The old clearing, the fireplace, the path through the woods. John told the story again, this time for cameras, but it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a tribute, a way to mark something sacred. When the documentary aired on local television, the response was overwhelming. Letters arrived, emails from people across the country. Veterans who saw themselves in John, widows who found comfort in the silence he described, children who said they wanted to protect animals when they grew up. It was more than he ever expected. Dr. Kramer called one night with news. The bear had been spotted healthy, strong, and alone, moving through a protected part of the forest near the Canadian border. "He made it," Kramer said, "fully reintegrated. He's doing fine." John closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. "Good," he said. "He belongs out there." That night, he stood outside the cabin, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "You did it, buddy." The wind rustled the trees softly, like a reply. Not words, but presence, recognition, a connection that didn't need language to be understood. The years rolled on gently. John grew slower, more careful, but not bitter. The pain in his knees didn't stop him from walking. The memories of Elaine didn't make him cry as often. He still missed her, of course. He always would. But the grief had grown soft edges. In its place came something else, purpose, reborn in old age. Some people waited their whole lives to find meaning. John found it at the edge of a frozen clearing, in the eyes of a wounded bear, under the watch of lions that chose not to kill. A sacred moment, written in instinct and blood. On the second anniversary of the rescue, the town invited him to speak at the community center. This time, the room was full: seniors, families, even some of the original wildlife staff. They gave him a plaque, though he laughed at the fuss. "I'm just a stubborn old man," he told them. But when he looked around and saw the faces, people who had been touched, changed, reminded of something gentle in themselves, he realized what they were really thanking him for. Not the act itself, but the reminder that even at the edge of life, we still have choices. And those choices ripple. One boy approached him afterward, clutching a drawing John standing in front of a bear, arms out, to golden lions in the trees behind him. The boy looked up and asked, "Did you think they were going to eat you?" John chuckled. "I did," he said. "But sometimes, even predators make strange decisions." The boy nodded, serious. "I think they knew you were trying to help." John ruffled his hair and whispered, "Maybe they did." That night, he hung the drawing on the cabin wall, beside a picture of Elaine. It felt right there, between love and wildness, between memory and myth. As seasons passed, the story softened into legend. Hunters, hikers, and townsfolk passed it along with reverence. Some believed every word, others doubted the lines, said it was too strange to be real. But John never argued. He just smiled when people asked, "Did that really happen?" And answered, "It happened to me." The bear was never seen again, not up close. But John often imagined him out there, strong, scarred, whole, moving through the trees like a guardian spirit, a survivor, a brother, a reflection of everything John had once thought was lost. He spent his last years surrounded by simplicity. A fire that always burned, a trail that always waited, people who came to visit, just to listen. He told fewer stories with time, but the bears remained. It was the one that mattered. The one that felt like a gift, not just to him, but to everyone who'd forgotten they were still capable of tenderness. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit by the window, coffee in hand, and look out into the woods, listening. Not for growls, but for silence. The kind that held presence, the kind that said, "You did what you were meant to do." And when John passed, quietly in his sleep, the town mourned with deep stillness. The Wildlife Center placed a carved wooden statue of a bear and a man at the trailhead near his cabin. Not to mark death, but to honor the moment two souls met in pain and chose compassion instead of fear. Beneath the statue, a single plaque was placed with 7 words. "He didn't just save a bear, he healed." No name, no dates, just the truth. And for those who knew the story, that was more than enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about wilderness or heroism or survival. It was about presence, a man who had nothing left to give and gave everything anyway. A creature bred for solitude that allowed someone to help it stand. And a moment in time, suspended by mercy, where even lions stepped back to let something sacred unfold. That kind of story doesn't fade. It doesn't need embellishment, it just needs to be remembered. Passed down, protected. John's story lives in the quiet spaces, in the slow walks, in the kind hands, in the eyes of anyone who chooses love over fear. It lives in the trees of Montana, in the soft crunch of boots through snow, in the hush of breath when we hold something broken and try to help it heal. And in that way, he never really left. He simply became part of the forest, part of the myth. A reminder that no matter how late it feels, it's never too late to choose to care.